Jeffrey, how you doing, man? 'Tis I, Captain Logan, here to give you another personal captain's log, chatting about some stuff just for you. And it looks like we're doing some more music talk today. Back to some They Might Be Giants, and all your questions today about the Giants, with the exception of the one about the documentary you asked me to watch, which I have not gotten around to. But Eric and I are shooting the Omnibus this weekend, so I will watch that before then, and I will try to listen to some tracks from your favorite band before I watch that film. And I want to apologize for not getting this to you sooner. I wanted to make sure and listen this album down. I like fun a couple times before I sat and talked about it, because the Giants are my absolute favorite band, and a lot of their stuff grows on me like a fungus. It's really interesting. When I first started listening to the Giants, there were a couple of tracks that got me right away. One of them, weirdly, was Mammal from Apollo 18, which is not even my favorite track, but it was, lyrically, it was so clever, and it had so much fun playing with language that it grabbed me right away. And then, of course, like with a lot of people, just the melodic, really earwormy, catchy stuff with the Giants immediately grabbed me. But a lot of my favorite Giants things now were not my favorite things before, and I think some of my favorite tracks are things that I wasn't even sure about, didn't even love the first time I saw them. And I have this a lot with some of my favorite movies and things too. Dark Knight I didn't think was the greatest thing since sliced bread until I saw it a couple of times. I didn't know what to make of Winter Soldier until I saw it 2 or 3 times. So like a lot of my fours, as it were, are things that I needed time to process, and I have that with the Giants. So I don't really want to start talking about a Giants album, and I'm not going to obviously give you, this will be a 10 or 15 minute video. I'm not going to give you like a full blown Giant review of this. Eventually Jeff and I will get to it, but on Whistling in the Dark. And I should mention, we have shot a whole bunch of those that I just haven't posted, that I need to get edited and get those posted. And so talking about your second topic when I get to that, about Giants albums and tracks I don't care for, a lot of that will show up in that show if you want to take a look at that. But I'm still going to answer your question. I'm just saying that obviously I'll go more in depth about all of this stuff in the Giants content we're making for the channel, for the 15 people who care about that. Anyway, so yeah, this album. So like I said, I wanted to listen to it a couple of times. Spine, for example, has become an album that I like to play during really specific circumstances. It's kind of become my like comic reading, comic organizing album, which is odd, but I had bought out a big, I'm just jumping all over the place, but I had bought out a big lot of comics starting in eBay business back in the early 2000s, I think 03 into 04. And Spine had just come out, and my wife and I, girlfriend at the time, were listening to that album, and the first time we heard it, we had a really bad experience with it, both of us. We were just like, what is this? The Giants have lost it. They are done. This sound is not working. And it grew on us the more we listened to it. Part of that, weirdly, was the bass. We listened to that on a stereo where the bass was just set to really overpower everything else, and that really hurt that music for us for whatever reason. And then we listened to it on a different system later, maybe in the car or something, with more reasonable bass settings, and ended up not loving it, but starting to feel better about it. And it's not my favorite Giants album by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it has its own, crystallized sound, and I go back to it when I'm in certain moods and when I'm doing certain activities. So I wanted to make sure and listen to I Like Fun a couple of times before I even began thinking or talking about it too much, because the first time I heard it, I was really unimpressed and thought, well, it might just deserve another listen, and I did feel better about it the second time through. But my gut reaction after just a couple of listens, and I'm sure my feelings about it will evolve. And I should say, of course, I'm really critical of the Giants because I've spent so much time listening to them, and so I don't have that like giddy fanboy thing of like I hear them and they're great just because they're them. Like I'm pretty critical of the group, and my feelings about it right now are that the first half is a real solid Giants album that might even be moving a little bit into a more refined sound of what they've been working on since they started the weekly Dial-A-Song stuff that they were doing a couple of years ago that turned into a couple of albums starting with Glean. And if you've listened to those and don't realize it, those albums are not, I can't remember the one right after it, but those albums were not conceptualized as albums. They were putting those out on their YouTube channel on Particle Men as music videos like once a week for a long time, and it was sort of like they were doing the like thing a week thing that what's his face did that used to open for them, and they're good friends. His name is Jonathan Colton. His name was on the tip of my tongue. Jonathan Colton. It was kind of like that experiment, but not conceptualized then as albums. They just like took select ones, and I think ultimately they used them all, but they put them all together. So on an album. So anyway, the point I'm making is that was not like a cohesive sound exactly, but it felt like it was like for each album. But it felt like they were kind of working their way toward what might become like a real solid album sound that you could really make a piece beginning, middle, and end with. And I'm a real stickler for this with albums. I feel like Apollo 18 and John Henry each have a real solid, specific, feel and tone about them. But then you get to something like, and I guess this goes into what I'll talk about later, with the things I'm not real keen on with the Giants. Then you get into an album like Factory Showroom, which is real kind of everywhere and all over the place. Although Jeff and I felt a little bit differently about it when we listened to it for our show, which again will go up at some point in the near future. So the first half of this I thought was real solid and was kind of excited about. It was sort of like what I wanted Join Us to be. Again, it's a little experimental. There's a lot of different kinds of influences, of course, like the Giants always have, but it's not one particular type of music. Some of it's real grungy, but there's some of their like flood quirkiness is in there, especially that third track, which I like a lot, and actually kind of wish I hadn't heard before the album came out, because it's even better, I think, in the sequence in the album. But All Time What I think is great and is really catchy, and I cannot get it out of my head. It's wonderful. And I think that's as good as anything they did during the Dial-A-Song stuff, which most of I thought was really fantastic, with the things like Glean and Music Jail and all of that stuff. I kind of wish they had taken like if you could go back in time. I would love to, and I don't know, maybe at some point I'll put together a little compilation and see if I can come up with like the perfect sound for what I'm starting to think of as like the modern, or if I want to be real pretentious, the postmodern They Might Be Giants era, and take some of the songs from Dial-A-Song and put it in with the stuff that I think in this is really good, but open the album exactly the same way. This is the first time, I should say, in a long time that the Giants have had a first track that on an album that is conceptualized in it as an album, not just a compilation of stuff. That, because again, like Glean is really good, but it wasn't, conceptualized as an album with the first track. It's the first time their first track has been one of the better songs in the album, and usually they kind of open with a weak track just to kind of get us into it, and ever since, like John Henry, I think they've had that problem, and this one didn't have that. Let's Get This Over With, I think, is a real good, solid starting track. What's sad about it is that's a real risky move, titling your first track Let's Get It Over With, because if the album sucks, if people don't like it, then that's what they're thinking as they're listening through the album. And unfortunately, that's how I felt about it by the end of it. The first half, again, I think is really solid and pretty good. Like I said, it's going back to Join Us, which I guess is my least favorite Giants album. I really don't like that album. It's just too mellow. It's too sleepy time. It needs a little bit of chutzpah in a few places. There's not enough variety of types of tracks. It just makes me want to go to bed. And this album doesn't have that problem at the beginning, but then it degenerates into that. I think there's way too much Flanzy just sounding like he's kind of screwing around in his apartment in the latter half of this. And again, I might feel better about it down the road. And I'm not gonna lie, I said I listened to this a couple times straight through. I did. I've also listened to the first half of the album a couple more times since then, because it's really difficult for me not to just want to stop it once I get to what I think is kind of the B-sides part. So this doesn't listen to me like a cohesive album. It listens to like a short album, like a quick 15-minute 7-track album, which for the Giants is pretty standard. Like the first track is pretty lengthy, but it turns into pretty normal length TMG songs, and they're usually pretty short. But it's like a 15-minute album, and then it just turns into B-sides. I don't think the Giants have a good enough sense right now of what should count for an album-worthy sound and what is just kind of like random silly B-sides. Like some of these songs, if you just threw on like the back of a record or called it just like your B-sides, they're kind of fun, just screwing around, goofing off, but I don't think they fit with the rest of it. And the really sad thing is, I think the worst song on the album is the title track, All Time Fun. I'm starting to kind of like laugh at it instead of with it as I'm listening to it. Like the first time I listened to it, I was just like, what am I listening to? And I could not get my mind around it. And I've started feeling like I sort of get what they're doing. Like I like the instrumental stuff at the end of that track, but the track itself, again, just sounds like Flanzy screwing around. It's kind of nothing, and then you get to the end of it, and it's like a State Songs track. Or like some of the more instrumental stuff in the State Songs. I say Flanzy, I honestly can't tell who wrote that one or if they co-wrote it, which would be really strange if that's what happened. But it sounds like a Flanzy song track that then turns into the stuff in the State Songs I don't like. I like State Songs, but there's a couple of tracks in that. That's Linnell's solo album. But there's a couple things in that just kind of meander and get random, and again, I can't sink my teeth into. So anyway, that's that album for me. It's a real mixed bag, but it's certainly not the worst thing they've put out in this let's call it postmodern era of TMEG. Best track on the album is All Time What. I'm Insult to the Fact Checkers is really starting to grow on me. I Left My Body is a real nice kind of grungy kind of tune. And I'm starting to really dig on Push Back the Hands, actually. That's right after I Like Fun. Bright Side, I'm starting to like a little bit more as the more I'm listening to it. But yeah, most of the rest of this, and I guess What's By the Time You Get This, Remind Me album. Yeah, it's okay. So yeah, real mixed bag, unfortunately. So let's move on to your second. And again, it might start going on me more and more as I'm listening to it. But let's go on to your second question, which is TMEG albums and tracks I don't really care for. I'm going to pull up a list to refer to, just in case there's some stuff that I don't think of off the top of my head. But like I said, my least favorite Giants album right now has got to be Join Us, and for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. Before that, it was Mink Car, but Mink Car is, I have a Smallville kind of situation with, kind of relationship with, where it's this real love-hate thing. Like, a couple of my favorite Giants tracks of all time are on that song, or on that album, excuse me. Like Older is of course a great track. They've done 15 different ways. It's a real malleable, easy to screw around and manipulate kind of song. It's real like kids sing-songy, folky, but like the best Giant songs that sound like that but are written more for adults. It's got this kind of like downer message that's just, you know, a sad truth of the world. Oh, you're older than you've ever been, and now you're even older. And then it's also got Hovering Sombrero, which is, I think, just indisputably one of the prettiest songs Lionel ever wrote. But that as an album, again, does not have a cohesive sound and has just some, what I kind of think of as nonsense. At the same time, I've been listening to it for so many years that if I tend to do this, if I mix all my Giant songs together and just put it on shuffle, I don't tend to skip any of the songs on that album, and there are some more recent things that I do skip. So I don't know if that's just I'm used to it, or if there's like a nostalgia component. It's hard to say. And you know, obviously everybody's experiences with things and perceptions of things are real different because of their histories with them. And so without just sitting here and attempting to psychoanalyze myself, I'm sure that especially like a younger person who were to grow up with the Giants, like my son Jason, who of course loves the Giants, he's liable to not have the same issues I have with some of the postmodern Giant stuff, because there'll be somewhat of a nostalgia component of just, well, I grew up with that and I listened to it a million times. But like my stepdad, who grew me up on the Giants, he doesn't like a lot of what's on Mink Car at all, and it never grew on him. So anyway, the worst tracks from the Giants ever are probably on Here Come the 1, 2, 3s and Here Comes Science. Their kids stuff. And if they'd never done any more kid stuff after ABCs, or after No and then Here Come the ABCs, I would think that they were brilliant kid songwriters and they could do no wrong there. And then 1, 2, 3s and Here Comes Science, it felt like there was a contractual obligation to make those albums, and their heart just wasn't in it. So they've got some just real lame duck total duds in both of those albums. And 1, 2, 3s has the same thing that I Like Fun has for me, though, where the first half of it is pretty solid, pretty good, and feels like more ABCs, and then the rest of it is just nonsense and kind of abysmal until you get to the end, and there's a nice track toward the end of that. Nanobots was okay. I thought it was a step up from Join Us, but I still wished that it could have been a little bit more more upbeat in places. Obviously, I don't mind some mellow and even like an overall, not like massive hard rockin' kind of album. But I don't think the Giants work real well when they're just doing like light rock. And at the very least, it's got to be super catchy and get stuck in my head. And not enough on Join Us and Nanobots were that way. Although Nanobots does open with You're on Fire, which is a decent opening track for them. Lost My Mind is decent. Circular Karate Chop is fun. But then you got stuff like Insect Hospital, Darlings of Lumberland, where I'm just like, who cares? Like, I just can't get excited about those tracks. And I don't want to think of myself as like a purist or someone who just likes the Giants from the early days, because like some of my favorite Giants albums have been, new when they came out. I'm not like a purist for the Pink Album and Flood days. I think technically their best album is probably The Else, and that was a decade ago. That's 2007. And it's not my favorite, but it is, just as far as like technical writing and again coming up with a cohesive album sound, that's probably technically their best album, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah. So those last couple, I guess 3 now, kids albums, because Why's not great either, are probably their worst stuff. And but like Mink Car, like I said, has a couple of tracks on it I really don't care for, and Factory Showroom, I like most of those tracks individually, but it doesn't make for a great album. So anyway, there is your personal log for this month, or from, I guess, last month, and I'll get your next one done soon. If you're having difficulty coming up with things that you want to see me talk about, feel free to just throw a real broad topic at me, and I'll just kind of try to come up with something interesting to create for you from that, or I'll just kind of prattle on, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And in the meantime, Jeffrey, I really appreciate you, and like I said, it's been a lot of fun getting to know you, buddy, man, whatever. And in the meantime, I'm Captain Logan, and I'll see you again next time.